So let's say by the next election we don't have universal health care, or we're not out of the slump. Do you think that this was kind of like our chance? And do you think if things are, let's say, just the same, stagnant, that they'd be able to just use that and completely?
Well, I think if people are still feeling, they have a good reason to feel that something's wrong. There's a reason why 80% of the country thinks it's going the wrong way. It's been the worst period of American economic history.
But it's just misdirected.
Well, it's misdirected, but you say the same about Nazi Germany.
Right.
It wasn't the Jews. It was, and in this case, it's even more plausible. If it's the rich liberals who own Wall Street and run the government and run the media and give everything to the illegal immigrants and don't care about us flyby people, that sort of thing.
But at the same time, it's also socialism, the fear of socialism. So you have the fear of the rich.
Yeah, but it's the rich. It doesn't, it's...
That's kind of a massive contradiction, too.
Sure.
Look, it's no more crazy than the belief, the very widespread belief, even on the left, that the Republicans stand for free markets and anti-statism, which is totally true. Ridiculous. Reagan was the most protectionist president in post-war American history. But, it's kind of like drummed into your head over and over.
Right.
I read it even in the left journals.
A lot of the people you grew up with that didn't have a high school education, you've often said that they were just as educated as the people you went to Harvard with, or you met at Harvard, and these kind of higher institutions. And I wanted to know if you could talk about the difference between self-education and formal education, and how a lot of times formal education can kind of lead to apathy. And then the second part of the question is, for someone who's new to politics, which a lot of our audience is, because they were sort of disenfranchised with the media and whatnot, where a good place to start is. Because I think sometimes when you want to get into it, you're so overwhelmed and you just feel like you're being lied to, and you just don't know where to begin.
Well, I think it's really pretty much the same answer in both cases. It wasn't self-education. These were my sort of, unemployed working class relatives. That's what you're talking about. They were parts of organizations. A lot of them were in the Communist Party. And we misinterpret the Communist Party as a result of decades of propaganda. For them, the Communist Party didn't have that much to do with Russia. Yeah, okay, so they said some things about Russia, but they really didn't care. It had to do with unemployment, with civil rights, with, for my seamstress aunts, it was a place they had a social life. They could spend someplace in the summer for a week, and it had educational activities, cultural activities. So it was kind of a community, a community bound together not by ethnicity or having been in the Second World War or something, but by common ideals, and they were progressive ideals.
Yeah.
And the unions were very intimately related to it, and it's in that general milieu that these people grew up and became educated. But it's not really self-education; it's mutual education in a culture of support and creativity. And remember too that in those days, unlike now, left intellectuals, many of them Communist Party intellectuals, like famous physicists and mathematicians and so on, were involved in popular education. Were writing books for really good books worth reading today, like Mathematics for the Millions and J.C. Bernal's books on physics and so on. So it was just part of a interrelated culture that involved left intellectuals and work-class people, some of whom had very little in the way of formal education. Some, got through high school, but some didn't even get through elementary school.
Wow.
But even there, it was self-education, but in a community. There was a community of emigres, left emigres who came over, fleeing from Europe, who would hang around these groups. One of them was one of my uncles, who never did get past fourth grade, had a newsstand. He was disabled, so under the New Deal programs, he was able to get a newsstand. but it just became a center for educated emigre life. Psychiatrists, doctors, professionals would just hang around, and he was a great guy, and they liked him, and they'd have discussions. He ended up getting quite an education.
Do you see anything similar to those groups today, or do you think that, if you don't have a college education or if you don't have a high school education, do you still think it's possible to obtain that kind of knowledge just by reading, or do you really think there is something to like a support group and gathering?
Well, doing these things alone is extremely hard.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the problems, there's been a huge effort. I don't even know if to call it propaganda, but the whole doctrinal system from is geared towards atomization. Be out for yourself. Get as much as you can in the way of consumer goods and forget about everything else. But it means that there's very little in the way of community. I mean, you can see it in all kinds of ways. I mean, say care for the elderly. I mean, in those days, it was just taken for granted. As people get older, to live with their families. You didn't send people to nursing homes. My grandfather lived with his daughter until he was 95. It was totally impossible, but they just worked it out, so the family took care of him.
Yeah.
But you were part of a group. And I think there probably still are pockets of ethnic communities that are like that. But these were not just ethnic. They were also, especially the ones I've been talking about, were social, cultural, political, and so on. And all that's been torn apart. I mean, people are just very much alone. And on your own, it's extremely hard to do anything. And that goes back to your other question, where do I start? Well, if somebody comes in here and says, I'm interested in biology, where do I start?
Yeah.
Well, you can't start alone.
Yeah.
You can't start reading every biology journal in the world. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to develop a kind of a framework of understanding, and that takes interaction. I mean, that's how science works. So, take the work on this floor or almost anywhere here, graduate science department. Take a look around. I mean, people are working together.
Yeah.
And they're talking to each other. You go out to the room out there, you'll see one guy standing at a blackboard, another guy talking to him, stuff like that. You work things out together. You can't do them. I mean, you can't. There may be some people who can, maybe Einstein can do it himself, but even that wasn't true.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a very complex community, including his wife, who did a lot of this stuff. But it's just very hard to come out of, be just thrown into a complicated world and say, okay, where do I start? And if there are real live social structures that you can be part of, you can work at your own ideas. You can hear what other people have to say. That's how a real democracy. That's what unions were in many ways. And one of the reasons for part of the passion about breaking unions, which is just overwhelming, is it does leave people alone. In fact, even the unions in the United States, as distinct from other countries, had this highly self-centered character to it. You can see it in the breakdown of the healthcare system. So you take, say, Canada and the United States, very similar societies. Canada has a functioning national healthcare system. The U.S. is alone in the industrial world, and it doesn't. Part of the reason for that is the difference in the way the unions acted. If you go back, the initiation of the healthcare system in Canada came from the labor unions, except what they fought for is healthcare for everyone. The American unions fought for healthcare for themselves. So UAW got a good social welfare package, healthcare, pensions, stuff like that for themselves, not for anyone else. And they, part of this deep indoctrination into, we're all in it together, no class struggle. There's only one group of people in the United States who are highly class conscious, business. So they're always fighting a bitter class war, but everyone else is supposed to be classless. So the labor, the working, the unions were willing to just trust management. Okay, since we're all in it together, you guys will take care of us and so on. Well, you can see what happens. If management decides, I'm sorry, game's over. They end up with nothing. If they had worked for social welfare for everyone, it would, not utopia, but at least there would be some functioning system for everyone. I think that's my own feeling is that's part of the reason why there's such a constant effort to try to malign and undermine Social Security. Like, for example, a lot of young people think that it's unfair. They have to pay for elderly people, which is true. Social Security takes money from working people, gives it to elderly people. Now, in any civilized society, people would say that's very fair.
Yeah.
I mean, they were working. Okay, they took care of you when you were young. Why shouldn't you take care of them when they're old? But this sense of kind of Mirandian amoralism is really driven into people. And in fact, a lot of young people think they'll never get Social Security because they're drowned in propaganda about how the system's collapsing.
Right.
System's
So we have to privatize it.
Yeah, it's been as healthy as it ever is. Tweak it a little, go on forever. But it's just driven in constantly, and there's a constant effort to privatize it, get rid of it. And I think part of the reason is because Social Security is a residue of that sense of community that was alive in the 30s. You really should take care of each other. You form the CIO, it's for everybody, not just for me. Labor slogans are solidarity, not I got to get what I want.
Right.
And Social Security fortifies it. I mean, it relies on it and also fortifies it. And from the point of view of the class warriors in the business world, that's dangerous. You really want people to be atomized.
Yeah.
If they're atomized, they're controllable. Then you can't control people by force anymore, but you can just get them to focus on nothing but maxing out 5 credit cards. Okay, you got them under control. They don't talk to anybody, have no ideas, and so on. They don't think you can do anything. And that's a real. If you want to talk about American exceptionalism, that's about what it is.
Yeah.
That would be an awful union slogan, just UAW, I got to get what I want.
That would be
That's
pretty
what
terrible.
it is.
Yeah.
And now they're stuck with it. In fact, there was a time, I remember around 1979 or so, Doug Fraser, the head of UAW, UAW was getting smashed for something or other, I forget what. He came out saying, I never realized this before, but you, management, you're fighting a class war. Yeah, sure, they're always fighting a class war. And they're vulgar Marxists, basically.
Right.
But everyone else is supposed to think that it's classless, it's harmony, Americanism,
Right.
that kind of stuff.
Speaking of American exceptionalism, America always likes to present itself as this great democracy. But in fact, in South America, we see actual democratic movements happening. What do you think the central difference is between an American culture where we vote to uphold leaders that really don't represent us and a South American culture where leaders who represent the people?
That's a very, in fact, I think probably the most democratic country in the world right now is Bolivia. So the United States is trying hard to undermine it. But if you think about what happened in Bolivia in the last 10 years, it's pretty astonishing. I mean, the most repressed population in the hemisphere, the indigenous population, which happens to be the majority, and has been just totally marginalized for 500 years ever since the Spanish. They managed to get themselves organized, active, elected a president from their own ranks, not some rich guy. They elected a poor farmer, and they developed the programs. And the programs are serious. Everyone knows what they are. You're not waiting for some leader to tell you, here's the programs. On crucial issues, cultural rights, issues of justice, multiculturalism, control of natural resources, really basic things. And furthermore, election is just one day in an ongoing process. So, okay, that day you push the levers, but then you go back to the struggle you were part of before. We came out of struggles against privatization of water and all sorts of things. I mean, that's real functioning democracy. So, of course, the old elites are trying to break it up. They don't like it. It's the eastern provinces. And the U.S. is supporting them. We don't know exactly how much, because U.S. aid will not release information on who it's funding. But you'd be pretty sure that it's funding the quasi-secessionist, sort of mostly white elites in the eastern provinces to try to break up the system. Democracy is intolerable. And our system is almost the opposite. Policies don't come from the public. They come from above. The public isn't even supposed to know about them, and usually doesn't. So campaigns are run so that they keep away from issues and talk about personalities, body language and rhetoric and that sort of thing. The front page of the New York Times has pictures of Michelle Obama wearing a designer dress in the morning and a different one in the afternoon. That's what you're supposed to be interested in, but not what's happening with healthcare. And what's happening is extremely interesting. So I don't know if you saw this, but there's a Senate committee, the Caucus Committee, which is meeting on healthcare. And they had a session several days ago, which fortunately was filmed by C-SPAN.
Yeah.
But, I asked a friend who does database, research, no coverage. And it was an astonishing thing.
Yeah.
I mean, here's healthcare reform. The only people who testify are people from the private industry.
The blogs picked up on it. The mainstream media ignored it entirely.
Yeah, we'll play the clip. And then just watching the senators laugh at them.
Yeah.
I forget what senator it was. He said, "We need more police." And everybody laughed. They thought it was great.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but people told me about it. That sounds incredible.
Yeah.
And that's the Obama administration. Okay, that's our kind of democracy. It's none of your business. And it's not that, these guys are doctors after all. They're not just the general population, though they do represent the general population. And polls for 50 years have shown that a large majority is in favor of something like this, but they're not part of the system. In fact, it's even interesting in the way that the Obama campaign and the media have pictured Obama's populist triumph. I mean, there were articles after the election, about how he had this army of people he'd mobilized and so on. But the tone of them, at least everyone I saw, including the campaign itself, was that this is really important. Now the Obama army is waiting for instructions. We're going to tell you, here's the next thing on our agenda. You go out and push the doorbells and push for brand Obama. That's what they call it, in fact. Well, that's a straight totalitarian concept, but that's called a new model of democracy here. The idea that, even the primaries work that way.
So why do you think in Bolivia they could see how democracy works?
Well, that's one thing. They've been fighting about it for 70 years.
Yeah.
It goes way back. They had a very radical tin miners union. In fact, they had technically a Trotskyite government in the late 40s and early 50s. The U.S. managed to co-opt it in various ways, but in fact, it's kind of interesting if you look back at the history. In the late 40s, the internal U.S. records identified two major problems in Latin America. One was Bolivia and one was Guatemala. In both countries, which had traditionally been nice dictatorships, there were bad things happening. In Bolivia was the Tin Miners Union, and Guatemala, they had first signs of democratic revival ever. It was about the same problem in both cases, but the government reacted to them in opposite ways. In Guatemala, they just threw out the government, post-military dictatorship. In Bolivia, they realized correctly, as it turned out, that they could co-opt the government. So they sort of got the lead. They acted in a supportive manner toward the government, but bringing them into the U.S. system and separating them away from their working class base and giving them privileges and so on, and it ended up with a dictatorship. The two systems ended up the same way with different techniques. And those were the two problems, because both of them had democratic movements. And it was just understood, can't tolerate that. And what's different now is that the U.S. can't do much about it. I mean, it's forced now to accept governments that it would have overthrown 40 years ago.
Yeah, when Evo Morales is on the Daily Show, it makes it difficult to disagree
Well,
with him.
even their favorite, Lula.
Yeah.
I mean, Lula, his positions are not very different from the Brazilian government that the Kennedy administration organized a coup to overthrow. It's just that now the U.S. doesn't have the power to do it. And it's a little on another level. It's kind of like what we were talking about before. The countries are getting organized, and they're even getting integrated for the first time. Latin America's been very separated. I mean, road systems, everything else. But there's a move towards integration, and that's a prerequisite for independence, just as in personal life, social organizations kind of prerequisite for independence of thought. And it's happening in the U.S., and also they have other options now that they didn't have. Like, China's an option, the European Union's an option, the trade's diversifying, other connections are diversifying. And the U.S. has basically lost at least weakened its two main weapons. One was violence, just overthrow the government, and the other was economic strangulation. It doesn't work as easily, so the U.S. is compelled to tolerate and even pretend to approve of governments that it would have opposed, like Brazil.
Yeah. My next question was about the 24-hour news networks, but just to tie it into this real quick, do you think that maybe part of the reason, in places like Bolivia, they did accomplish everything they did, and the people worked together, is because they didn't have this kind of 24-hour news network, just either throwing out propaganda or having them scared about, swine flu instead of health insurance, and they just didn't have just that constant barrage of just fear and just, government memos.
Well, I don't know. I mean, a lot of these countries, if you look at the media, I don't know about Bolivia specifically, but in most of Latin America, the media are very right-wing. And, I mean, like Venezuela must be about the only country in the world where the major media are not only oppose the government, but, want to
That's right. They want to
drawn and quartered, strangled.
Yeah.
You don't have media like that in any other country, but that's been true in Latin America for a long time. The media, because it's the nature of the societies, the very high concentration of wealth, huge poverty, the media, of course, in the hands of the rich. So, yes, of course, they're ultra-right-wing.
Yeah.
How much they reach the population, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it is just us.
I've been told, I don't know enough to know, that radio and television are even worse. I've looked at the print media.
Really? Well, I wanted to ask you about our media. We were watching you, the pretty famous debate between you and William F. Buckley, and right afterwards, the contrast was really weird. Right afterwards, we watched Keith Olbermann on MSNBC, who, he's kind of known as the left's hero now, but he's never actually debated anyone with opposing views really on his show. And I wanted to ask, do you see the new liberal pundits, like MSNBC, for example, as being either important as kind of conduits of information that we may not hear on other news networks, or do you see them as just kind of left-wing versions of Fox News and a substitute for actual independent journalism?
I really can't say because I've never seen them.
That might be for the rest.
Yeah, I think it is.
I think they're on cable.
Yeah, they are.
There.
I hear about them, from friends, but I just don't.
Well, it's a really bizarre thing where they just they kind of just do the same thing the right does, where instead of actually going out and doing journalism, like say like an Amy Goodman or even some of these bloggers like Glenn Greenwald, they instead just kind of make fun of the right wing, like Fox News kind of makes fun of us. And then I think the scariest problem is, so now everybody kind of assumes we have our liberal voices, right? But because they're on MSNBC and because they're owned and their bosses are, these bosses of these giant corporations, by default, there are going to be things that they're just not allowed to say. So it kind of puts us at ease because we're like, we have our voices, but then...
Well, do they have Do they interview left-wing activists and people like that?
Never activists. They'll have left-wing personalities. So, like a comic who's left-wing.
But
never like a Greenpeace activist or anything.
Yeah,
I've
not
never
even
seen.
people like Howard Zinn.
No, certainly not Howard
No,
Zinn.
I haven't. No.
Yeah, well, see, that's the difference with, Amy, you get information from her.
Right.
It's not just, she makes fun of somebody, doesn't make fun of people. She says, look, here's things you don't know about. Why are there Somali pirates, for example? Okay, here's why. If toxic wastes are being dumped in the water and multinationals are fishing out the waters illegally, people have to survive. Okay, I don't know if you hear that you certainly don't get it in the press.
No, it was the opposite, where one of our biggest left-wing people, Rachel Maddow, who's very liberal on social issues, so people just kind of assume she's gentle. When the pirates came up, she was...
It was gross. It was just Navy SEAL worship.
Really?
Showing the graphics of them shooting them in the head.
So that's kind of an interesting case because there's quite a background there. Part of it, which I think Amy did show, I didn't see it, but people told me she showed, was that it's the direct result of illegal overfishing and toxic dumping. Europe, mainly Europe, I think, probably Saudi Arabia and others, which just drives the fishermen out of the water. But there's a further background. During this so-called war on terror, the Treasury Department found a charity, big charity, which they claimed was funding terrorists. And that was their big triumph. They closed down this charity. They later conceded that they were wrong, weren't doing anything. But it turned out that this charity that they closed down was helping keep Somalia alive. It was a major source of income for Somalia, and it even was developing banks and businesses and so on, just plain. So when they pulled the rug out from under them, that really was shafted the economy. Not much of an economy to begin with, but when you pull out a big segment like that, it's harmful.
Do you remember the charity?
I wrote about it. If you ask me, I'll...
Sure.
I have an article about it a while back.
Do you think it's ever acceptable to use military intervention, and how do you think the military should be used in the case of a situation like the genocide in Darfur or the Taliban's takeover of the Swat Valley?
Well, first of all, these are different cases. Darfur, it's a good question why Darfur is such an issue. There's a lot of killing in Darfur. Most of it, the numbers apparently are mostly made up, but it's substantial. On the other hand, it isn't a fraction of the dead in Iraq, let's say, and it isn't even a tiny fraction of the dead in the Congo right nearby. So why is there a huge campaign about Darfur and not one 100 times as bad about the Congo and one 1,000 times as bad about Iraq, because we're doing it? Well, it's not for pretty reasons, I think. In Darfur, it's presented as a morality play. Poor blacks being killed by bad Arabs. There's no such differences. But Arabs you're supposed to hate. And it's sort of nice to be in favor of the blacks. And there are safe Darfur committees all over the place, but apparently not much funds, if anything, goes to Darfur. So it's become a huge morality play. Now, what are you going to do with intervention? In fact, one of the decent things that the Bush administration did, there are many, but there are some, one of them was that it did help negotiate this partial settlement of a major civil war, the North-South Civil War. There's other complexities in the Western, not Darfur, in the Sudan. In the Western Sudan, Darfur, there's other problems like this. There's just very complicated multi-ethnic problems. There are problems between nomads and farmers. Desertification is driving the nomads off their land, and they interacted. They had a kind of a organic interaction with the farming communities in the past, but that's just become extremely hostile. And it's striking that the few people who know something about Sudan are against military intervention, like Alex Sewell or Mahmoud Mamdani and others. They actually have the problem that they know something about it. They're not just running the morality, but so military military intervention isn't the answer. They need political settlement and economic aid and so on. The Taliban in the Swat Valley, it's again part of a much bigger issue. First of all, what we call Taliban are probably to a large extent just the Northwest tribes who've never accepted central government control ever. They've never accepted the Durand line, the line that separates Pakistan from Afghanistan. It cuts right through Pashtun territory, and for them it's as if somebody outside power separated Cambridge from Boston or something. They just go up and down between them. There are Taliban there, but it's very unclear who they are. Also, that's just one of the uprisings that's tearing Pakistan apart. There's a big revolt in Balochistan that's been put down very brutally. There's disturbances in Sindh. The Pashtun hate the Punjabis. The army is mostly Punjabi. It's a very difficult internal situation. And foreign invasion, even if it's conceivable, which it isn't, it's a big reason why the U.S. is using drones and troops. You can bomb people, if you're not there. But it's an internal Pakistani problem, and it's a much bigger one than just Swat Valley. Part of the reason why the country is not. There's a segment that's radical Islamist, but it's a small segment. It's a pretty democratic country in many ways. When you have a vote, the votes are against the radical Islamists. On the other hand, the people in these areas, it's a feudal society. A tiny percentage of the population has probably all the wealth. And there's tremendous poverty there. There's no functioning society. There's no security. There's no health. There's nothing. No agricultural support. And when these so-called Taliban come in, they may be, they are brutal, and maybe people don't like them, but at least they impose some kind of order, which apparently for many people is better than nothing. That's one reason why Pakistan is not sending the army after them. It's using special forces and the Air Force, probably because they just don't trust the army, because they sympathy with them. But these are, again, and in fact, we have a big hand in that. It's one of Reagan's legacies. It's never been pretty in Pakistan. The U.S. has supported military dictatorships all along, but in the Reagan years, it went out of control. Pakistan had a vicious military dictator, Zia-ul-Haq, who also wanted to radically Islamize the country. So money was pouring in from Saudi Arabia, which is a very extreme fundamentalist version of Islam, different than the softer Sufi kind that they had in Pakistan. They had madrasas all over the country where kids are doing nothing but studying Quran and becoming Islamic extremists, and Reagan was pouring money in. He also pretended, I don't know if it's Reagan, whoever in his administration was doing these things, they were pretending that Pakistan wasn't developing nuclear weapons, and they knew perfectly well that they were, so that they could keep the flow of funds from Congress. The purpose of it was to kill Russians. In fact, they said so. The Russians were in Afghanistan. This is a great opportunity to kill. It wasn't to help the Afghans. In fact, it harmed them. But they were killing plenty of Russians, and it was sort of fun. So if Afghanistan and Pakistan go down the tube, somebody else will worry about it.
Thank you for listening. Check out wearecitizenradio.com.